So let's talk about the idea of adding maps and geolocated data to our apps. I think when we created this app, let me turn off notifications so you don't get any do not disturb us on. Okay. I think we added to this app. We look at the schema. Did we add an address? We did. Perfect. So our students have an address already, right? This will be like 2220, whatever address is here, Central Avenue. And these are the addresses we would like to be able to put on a map, search by distance, all those sort of things. Right. So in order to do that, we're going to use a gem named Geocoder. This is probably the geocoding library for Ruby. It's an oldie but a goodie. So this library is going to provide us a lot of things. It's going to let us take an address and turn it into a latitude and longitude to place on a map. It's also going to extend Active Record to give us queries that can say, find all of the students who live less than 10 miles away from this location. Show me all of the people who live in a certain region. This is what Geocoder is going to do. It does forward and reverse geocoding. So forward geocoding is address to latitude, longitude. Reverse geocoding is if you had a pin somewhere or you have a latitude and longitude, what address is at that location? Right? So if someone just gives you a latitude and longitude, you could say, where is that? It can use 40 different APIs. So by default, it comes with being configured to use a free geocoding service. That's pretty good. To use many of the better geocoding APIs, you have to have an account. Some of them charge, some of them are free. Some, I think like Google's are free, but you can only do a certain number of requests per day, like 1,000 requests a day. And they have documentation on how to use those. So if the geocoder you're using isn't giving you good results, you just say, oh, let me try Yahoo's or Google's or Bing's. Right. So it integrates with Active Record, right, to do things like search within a radius, right, a rectangle or a ring. So let's start using it and see what that looks like. So in our app, the very first thing we need to do is add that gem to our gem file. And I want to show you two different ways of doing that. So we've seen this where we go into our gem file and we add a gem here or we uncomment a gem. If we use the bundle add command, bundle add and you give it the name of the gem, will automatically add that gem to our gem file here. Let me get geocoder, and it did bundle install for us. So bundle add and the name of the gem will just add that gem to our gem file and automatically install. Much like yarn add name of JavaScript package adds a JavaScript package. So now geocoder is part of our app. Where am I going? To my notes. Right, we did bundle add. So now we want to be able to take, and in my demonstration, I'm going to use the idea of a restaurant. In our app, we're going to keep track of students, and we know that the student has an address column. The name of the column doesn't matter as long as we're consistent as how we use it. Some people will say address, some people will say location. Some databases you'll have address line 1, address line 2, city, state, zip code, country, and you have to combine them together. We're looking for the model that has the location information. What we need to add to that model is a latitude and a longitude column, because we're not going to geocode that address every single time. We're going to set the system up that every time we create or update the model that has the address, we're going to geocode. So we don't want to be geocoding every time we need to know where is this job, where is this restaurant. We want to do it once. So let's add to our Let's add a migration to add those two columns. So every time we want to change our table structure, right? Add a table, remove a table, add a column, remove a column, rename a column, change the type of a column. That is changing the structure of the data. We use migrations to do that. Right? And in the Rails guides is some great documentation on migrations. Or you can say Rails generate migration, and it will give you some documentation here.
Is this like the DB migration?
This is once you generate the migration, you run Rails DB migrate to apply the migration. So Rails generate migration creates the migration file. Rails DB migrate applies that migration to the database. So this creates the code. Rails DB migrate runs the code. So the example here is, hey, we'd like to add some columns. We want to add a title and a body to a post, and we give it the types. That's generally what we want to do. We want to Rails generate migration, add, let's say, add latitude and longitude to student. The part at the end, this to post and to student, you can use any name you want, but as you end your migration with something like to student or to post, and it starts with the word add blah, 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 to post, add blah, 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 to student. Rails is gonna know, oh, you're adding columns, and which model are you adding them to? Because you'll notice afterwards, like we did here, you're just giving the names of the columns and their types. In this case, latitude, float, longitude, float. And Rails is going to figure out automatically, when we look at the migration, this migration file here, aha, add column to the students table. Oops, why did I get a students? Oh, because I put a space. Look at that. I put a space in here. Let's fix it. So I can fix it two ways. I can come in here to the migration and remove this row and change this. This is why I always check my migrations first, because sometimes they mess up. Or I can destroy the migration and then regenerate it and fix my error. That looks better. So a reason why to always check it is to make sure you didn't do a typo like I just did. So this looks right. We want to add a column to the students table for latitude, and it's a floating point, right? It's got decimal places. The decimal place is super important to latitude and longitude. So latitude and longitude, that looks good. So this, Mira, you're right. This is where we would do Rails DB migrate. We created the migration. We know the code looks right. This runs the migration and changes the database. So the Rails generate creates the code, Rails DB migrate runs that code. And now I know that that migration is there. Now if I look at my schema file, now my students table has latitude and longitude. We need that so we can now start using geocoder. So let's look at the other geocoder directions. So, right, we generate and we migrate. Now we need to add the ability to geocode to the model. So I need to tell the student model, this is why I want to be able to look around. You're going to say like, hey.
I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
I did wonder about, if you could go back to the, was wondering if you designated students, like if that was in the command.
It is.
Okay, because I just didn't,
It's right here, to student.
Oh, okay, so that's what I was
The name of the migration is important.
Right, that's what I was reading, and I wasn't sure. I was, so you have to, more explicit, and it just knows to student.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It knows add, the word add at the beginning of a migration means we're going to be adding columns. And it knows that if I end it with to and the name of the model, it will automatically pull that student out, call it students in my migration.
Wow.
Now, if I called this Rails generate migration, do the map stuff, Rails is going to say, you didn't give me enough context, I'm just going to create an empty migration, and then I have to type all that stuff in.
Right.
So this just makes it easier like that. So like, I just want it to write code for me, and if I follow a little bit of rules, it's not going to automatically figure out what to put here. Right, sorry, not my wrong one, the correct one. Right, it can't figure that out. It'd be nice if it could figure it out from the names here. I normally, in the middle, put something in there that tells me what I'm doing. Right, add latitude and longitude to student. What am I adding? Latitude and longitude. I could have said add geocoding to student. That would have been fine too. Because after the name of the migration, we have to put the columns we want to affect.
Right.
That's how that goes.
Okay, great.
Cool. Yeah. If I don't see you because I'm not turning and looking, then just yell.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes.
So when you create the name, you say like student 2 instead of student 2, but on the column it says student 2, and
Here, students.
yeah, that's plural.
Yes, because this is the name of the model. This is the name of the table. Add to student. We're talking about to the student model here. And these here are always singular. I think it would work okay if you said students here, but typically we just say singular here. And if you're never sure, right, you can just say Rails generate migration, and it will show you some examples. Right, add body to post, not posts, plural. Cool, good questions. Now we need to configure and tell the model, hey, we want to geocode these things, which means we've got to add a couple lines to our student file. So in addition to belonging to the cohort, we're going to add this command, geocoded by, and then the name of the column we're going to geocode. So if I had called that column location, this would say geocoded by location. If this said geocoded by place, and I called the column place, I just need to make sure that, those columns match. Right? Address is a pretty common one. Right? If you're going to have the address as one long string, which I kind of recommend for your projects if you're doing locations, it just makes it easier. Then that just tells GeoCoder what column in the table do we use to look up the latitude and longitude, and then we have to tell it when do we do it. So this says here, after the validations happen, geocode. So after we validate that this student is correct, we'd like to geocode. So this is when we create a student or when we update a student. We're automatically going to geocode, that is turn their address into a latitude and a longitude. There's a lot of other configurations we can put here, and there's lots of other ways we can do this geocode. In that right now, every time we save a student, regardless of if we're changing their address, we're still going to geocode the student. So sometimes what we do is we put some conditions here that say, hey, only geocode the student if the address is changing. But for now, this is kind of the simplest way we can do it. It's going to geocode the student every time. Let's go take a look and see what that looks like. Let's go find one of our students.
So those 2 lines are hard-coded.
Yes, these are 2 lines of configuration that we need to tell the geocode gem how to work. We say geocode gem, you're going to geocode this address, and when do I geocode? I do it after I validate. So this means every time we save, right? We do our validations. Is the name the right length? Is the password the right length? Do they have a name? All those validations that we talked about. After all that's done, but before we save, that's when we're going to go look up their address. So let's take a look at that. So here's our student. Here's our student's address. Let's give it a better address. What's our address here? 2220 Central Avenue, St. Petersburg, Florida, 337. What's our address? What's our zip code? I should know this, right? I work here. 33712. Okay, so here's our student. Let's save our student. Notice that the latitude and longitude are nil, right? We don't have anything. Once we saved it, notice that it took a little bit longer. That's the geocode gem reaching out over the internet and saying, what is the latitude and longitude of this address? And you'll notice that what did it do? It updated the latitude to this and the longitude to this. That should be the pin location on a map of where 2220 Central Ave is located, right? It don't get much easier than that for looking up addresses.
Sorry.
I was going to ask, for the address itself, you'll need both the address, city, state, and zip code
Yeah.
in order for that to work.
Yeah, and the better quality this address is, the more likely you're to get a correct geolocation. Yeah, I think for you, you're pretty lucky because you're probably going to generate most of that data.
Yeah.
And during the demo, you're going to ask people like, "Oh, what's your address?" And you'll be able to type in really nice addresses. When you're making an app where you're going to let the general public type in addresses, you'll want to do more error checking. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you typed in something that doesn't have a state. It helps if you put a state in, those sort of things. So this is generally kind of the format you'll want to use to ensure that you get good latitude and longitudes. Things like Google's geocoder is a little smarter in that it says, oh, you put 2220 Central Ave. Well, you're in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm going to give you St. Petersburg, Florida's 2220 Central. But the one we're using is not as smart as some of the others. If you want to play around with other geocoders, awesome.
I was wondering about, there's a similar way to do this, but say if you had, do you have to pass in the Latin Lodge, or could you pass in, I'm just trying to think, could you get the address back instead of having like maybe Latin Lodge in the data itself and then retrieving an address?
Yeah, and if you knew a latitude and longitude, you can get the address, so we can go backwards. So we gave it 27.770955,
Right.
and we gave it minus 82.6634, we could get back the address. So one of the things we might look at when we look at the React side of it is, your browser knows where it is, right? Your browser has geolocation, your phone knows where it is. So some of the things people do is when the map comes up, automatically center the map on where the person is.
Yeah.
Right, so that's the reverse geolocation.
Oh, okay.
If you want to know, here's where the pin is, you can see that on the map, but you want to know what's at that location, that would be the reverse. So if we had our app and said, hey, ask the browser where it is, and then ask what's the address where that browser is, we would get the browser's latitude and longitude, and then we would ask geocode to reverse that. Given the latitude and longitude, give me back the address.
That makes, yeah.
Yeah.
That would make more
So
sense.
what we end up doing is we're essentially caching that latitude and longitude. Because did you notice how long it took to do that resolution? You know, it took a beat, right, to do that resolution. Now imagine if you were trying to map hundreds of addresses and you had to do that every single time to put the pin on the map. Your maps would take a long time to load. So we pre-compute the latitude and longitude when we save the model. Then when we're doing the map, we're not pulling the address out of the database, we're pulling that latitude and longitude back out. So yes, you could do it straight from the address, but it would be pretty slow.
Yeah, it wouldn't make much sense.
Yeah, it wouldn't be very efficient. Cool. That's mostly it for the Rails side. The only other thing I think we need to do in our app is now in the views for students, we should come in here and let's add the latitude and the longitude to the JSON, because we're going to want that. In addition to the ID, the name, the address, etc., we also want the longitude and latitude back out. So adding that to the JBuilder for a student, now when we run our React app, we'll have that data. Now, if we had generated our scaffold with the latitude and longitude, it'd already be there. So if you're creating a model and you know that there's an address and you know that you're going to geocode, go ahead and scaffold that latitude and longitude, then it will already be there. We're adding this after the fact. So we have to go in and add those columns with migrations, and we have to add those things to the JSON. If you're starting from scratch, hey, Rails generates scaffold restaurant, name, address, latitude, longitude, you're set.
That's the JBuilder?
Yes. Yeah, you have to go back into the JBuilder. If you didn't do it when you generated the scaffold, you have to go into the JBuilder file and tell it, I want these fields as well.
Right.
This is why, like, spending some time with that ERD and then recognizing, oh, this is going to be something I'm going to scaffold. Like for your project, when you go to generate that scaffold for your job or the location, anything that has the address, tack on that latitude and longitude that's floats, and won't have to go back and do this extra work. Literally, all you'll have to do is you'll have to add geocoder to your gem file, and to your model, add these 2 lines. That's literally it. They could not make that more easy. And this is one of the things I like about how easy it is to integrate things into a Rails application.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I want to add geocoding. I find the right gem. I do the 1 or 2 lines of configuration, and hey, it does all the hard work for me. Yes, there's more depth there, configuration and validation, and you can really get deeper with it. But if you're just trying to I just want to turn addresses into latitudes and longitudes, awesome. Let's talk about the React side.
Also, are we going with that mapping?
No. Now we're going to do the React side of mapping. Let's put maps on our app, on our front end. So the library that I'm going to show you is called React Map GL. It comes from our fine friends at Uber. They created this library. It's pretty good. It's one of the better ones that I've seen in terms of being able to implement maps. And this is one I suggest anyone who's doing a map thing try and use. Will is also doing maps in his applications, and he's using the same thing based on Mark and I's recommendation. So this is the library we're going to use. Let's add it to our app. So this is going to get added to the Yarn application. So in the directory we did yarn start, we're going to do a yarn add. So my client directory, React Maps JS. Nope. Oh, React Map GL. React Map GL. React Map GL. Let's make sure that's added. Yep. So our mapping library is on. Let's restart Yarn. And now we can go put a map somewhere in our app. So let's think about where we want to put this map. Let's go back and refresh our memory with the interface. Let's log in. Come on, Google, help me out here. So let's add a student. Jason Perry, 20, Central, St. Petersburg, 372. So I think on this page we could have, let's come up with a different location here. There's Casita Taqueria, here's their address.
Okay. To clarify, when you were saying about adding to the JSON to JBuilder, that's really only after migration when you have to add the columns?
Yes. Yeah, if you're adding columns to a model and you want them to be in your API, you then have to go in yourself and go into the JBuilder and add those columns. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So is JBuilder then not necessarily? I mean, it's not like required if we don't have any migrations.
Correct. Yeah. If you're not adding anything to the scaffold after you've already done your scaffold, there's nothing you have to change in the JBuilder.
Cool.
So if you add new things like latitude and longitude and you want them in your JSON response, you have to add them. Kind of like the other day with your app where we had to add the composers to the eras JBuilder.
Yeah.
When you find there's something more you need, if you're changing your API, what your API is generating, that is all done by changing what's in the JBuilder file. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So cool. Hey, we've got these two students here. Maybe let's do the map right here. We're going to put the map on this page and have it represent the map of where the students are. So let's take a look at our client app. So now we're on the React side. So I think that's on the cohort details, right, where we render the students. Right, and we're just rendering an unordered list. Let's add a new component to represent the map. So let's add a new component. Let's call it a student map. Let's generate a little component here. Oops. And then we're going to put the map inside of a div. And here's the reason. This class here is going to be important in a minute. So we're going to put the student map inside of here. But the very first thing we need to do before we can do that is import the map. So let's import all of the map things we're going to need at the top. So eventually we're going to use a map.gl, a marker, a navigation control, and a pop-up. We're eventually going to use all of those components in generating this map. But the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to put this map on the page. So let's talk about this map right here, this map.gl map. So this map.gl map is going to take a couple of things. A width and a height. So how much of the parent component do I want this map to take up? Almost always you want that to be 100%. Because we'll control the size of the map with our CSS. There are many different map styles, and in the documentation for the library, I'll show you all the different map styles. So this is a dark map, so it's like an inverted white text on a black background. There are maps that look more like Google Maps. There are maps that have terrain. There are all different kinds of maps. And finally, this map API token is my API token for Mapbox. So you're free to reuse my token if you want, or if you want to sign up for your own, you can. There's not a big reason to sign up for your own, other than if for some reason someday I cancel my Mapbox account and you're using mine, right, then your features go away. You just have to go to Mapbox, sign up for an account, and get a token, just like we signed up for tokens in other places. So we also need to tell the map it's a viewport. So every map has a viewport. So you can think of it like if we had a giant map on the wall of the entire Earth, we can only look at a certain part of it at a time, right? It's like having a little cutout of what part of the world are we looking at. So that viewport comes with a couple of things. That viewport has a latitude and a longitude, which is the center of the map. The zoom, how far zoomed in or zoomed out do we want? And a bearing and a pitch. So rotated and pitched, right? So these are values that I think are handy. It's going to matter on what your map. This is centered over St. Petersburg at a zoom that gives a nice view of St. Pete. If you want your map centered on Chicago, you would use different latitudes and longitudes. But you'll notice that I'm putting this viewport in the state. Right? My state has a viewport that's a latitude, a longitude, and a zoom. The reason being is what's one of the first things people do when they get to a map? They start dragging it around. The way we're going to keep track of where is the user dragging the map is via updating state. Right? Everything in React, if you make a change, it's going into state. So it makes sense that the viewport goes into state. Then we just want to use that viewport down here. So this is using a little bit of fancy JavaScript. I think at some point Mark or Jason showed you object destructuring. Did they show you object destructuring? This syntax here with the braces on the left-hand side. Right, this looks a little bit different than what we were maybe used to when making a variable. This line here is the same as saying const viewport equals this.state.viewport. Right? So it's very often that we want to pull things off of state, because otherwise what we'd have to say down here is this.state.viewport. So if you find yourself in your render functions going this.props dot, this.props dot, this.props dot, this.state dot, this.state dot, you can pull that variable off of the state and use that variable. Then this line here is the spread operator. Right? The spread, S-P-R-E-A-D, spread, like you spread out, right? You take a variable that's small and you make it big. What's happening is all of the attributes of viewport are being put into this. This line is the same thing as saying latitude equals viewport dot latitude and longitude equals viewport dot longitude and zoom equals viewport dot zoom and bearing equals viewport and come on, type.
What's bearing and pitch?
So bearing is your what direction are you pointing? Is north up or is north to the left? And pitch is how the map is rotated up and down. So you've seen that in maps before where you can like spin the map. So bearing is the spin and pitch is like the 3D kind of view, right? So the spread operator here is instead of typing all of this, I just type this. Yeah, dot 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 viewport says take all of the attributes of viewport and make them attributes of the map GL. Right? It's called the spread operator. It essentially takes that viewport attribute and spreads them into this object. So that's why it's nice that when we created the viewport, we made the attributes of the viewport exactly the same attributes that we want from the map. And that makes that code really easy to write.
So other than map GL, we can use that for spread operator for React.
This spread operator works anywhere. It's very handy when the object you have on the right here has the same attributes of the thing you want to assign to this. That's what it's helpful for. So let's see if this map showed up in our app.
I have a question real quick.
What's that?
About the view within the spread brackets. Is that corresponding? Is it corresponding with the variable up there, or does it matter creating a const variable?
It's to this one. This viewport ties to this viewport,
To state.
which comes from state.
Cool.
Yeah. When you see other React developers who've been working for a while, they'll tend to do this. Before you know this, what you're going to end up doing is something like this: latitude equals this.state.latitude, and longitude equals this.state.longitude, and zoom equals this.state.zoom. You are likely to write a code like this, where you're repeating. Well, if you notice, this and this are the same thing. So, it's this.state.viewport. It's even worse. It's this. So when you see this repetition, that's where things like destructuring are helpful and spread is helpful. It just helps you write less code. That's all. But it also requires that you think ahead about what you name your variables. so they line up the right way. It's a little bit of an advanced technique, but it's worth saying. So we don't see our map here. I put the map on the page, but we don't see it yet because I have to add it. In the render students, how about before the UL, we put in the map. So let's put in our student map right here. And we still don't see it because the map is really there. If we go into inspect and we go into React, here is our, let's find our students. It's always harder to find when you have router. Here's our student map, but what's the size of the map? How many pixels high by how many pixels tall? Can you see it show up there? 930 pixels wide by 0 pixels tall, right? So this is why having this div here is nice. The student map is now in our CSS. We can say student map. Let's see what happens if we give it a width of like 500 pixels. Ooh, and not this, it's .student map. So if we refresh this, now the map is 500 pixels wide, but we also need to make it 500 pixels tall. And hey, there's our map. Right. Those coordinates are, I think, the old Iron Yard address, I'm realizing now, because it's focused on downtown. Right? And it's this like dark map. But notice I can't click and drag yet. Right? I'm clicking and dragging, and there's not that little fancy kind of like how Google Maps has got this little, where's our navigator? They used to have like a little pop, oh, it's down here, I'm covering it. Right? It doesn't have this little navigator for like zooming. Right? We'd like to have those things in here. So it'd be nice to be able to click and drag the map around and zoom and all of that. So let's work on that. Let's move the map when we drag around. So in order to do that, we've got to do a couple of things. We've got to add an on viewport change to the map. So in our map, we want to call a function when the viewport changes. So when the user takes the map and they drag it, when they take the map and they zoom it. This is kind of like an on change for an input, right? When we type in an input field, but this is a little more complicated. So very similar to, but different than updating something. Let's write that update viewport function. So the update viewport from the map takes a viewport, and we're going to update the state, changing that new viewport. Here, I'm using kind of like object destructuring, but the other way. If I had called this something like new viewport, then you would think that I would do this, right? New, make my viewport state the new viewport, right? We've seen this before, like event.target value, this.setState, something to something. But if I make this variable called viewport, come on. All right, I make this variable viewport, then I can shorten this code this way. Instead of doing JavaScript object A key is value from variable A, I can leave out the colon and the value and just say viewport. So this says this.setState viewport to viewport. Now, hopefully, click on the map. What's going on? What did you do? I cannot. Let's see if we have any errors. Console. No. Click and move. Click and move. No. I'm updating the viewport and the viewport. I'm clicking and dragging, but I'm not getting anything. Let's see if we can debug this real quick.
Is server working?
It's not. This doesn't depend on the server. This is all on the client side. So let's see if we can find the map. The map is down here in my route, in my cohort details, in my student map. Here's my viewport. Let's move this out of the way. Let's see if the viewport function is being called. Let's see if that on viewport change is being called. Should also make sure that I spelled it right in my notes. No. Let's go take a look at the docs real quick. I may have. Here's the documentation. API reference. Where is the map? On viewport change. Did I spell it correctly? Let's make sure. That looks right, doesn't it? On viewport change equals this dot update. Oh. Look at the name of my function. Look at how I spelt it.
So does it need the underscore? Is that?
No, that's just it could be called update viewport. This is a style that I picked up from JSON of starting my handle functions with an underscore.
Oh, sure. Just for better clarification.
Yeah. So this is update view, lowercase p port. There we go. That's why having good notes helps. And why the documentation helps. Now, hey, and see that viewport changing, my console log, every time I move the viewport. All right, that's changing. Yay, now we can drag the map around. Perfect. Spell things correctly, Gavin, with the correct capitalization. Your life is good. But we'd also like to have some controls. Let's get those controls on here. Now, then we'll get to your question. So let's inside of the map here. Oops. Add a navigation control. So this navigation control needs a little bit of styling. So we're going to add that styling here as well. So we're going to add some styling. Yeah. So this nav style is applying inline styling of an absolute position in the top left corner of the map. And we should get, oops, I want this inside of the div, like this. What happened? Am I getting an error now? It says can't read popular bearing of null. Huh. So what this should be adding is a navigation control to show us where we are on the map. So that's fine. That's still update viewport, on viewport change, navigate. Let's go look at navigation control. Oh, it goes inside of the map. It goes inside of the map GL. Like this. Like that's where it goes. See, it goes inside of the map. There we go. Now we have this, and now this will let us zoom. We can also zoom with the 2 fingers. And then this, I think, will let us rotate. I think. That's not working. Not sure what that's for. I thought that was rotate. But now we can zoom with this little navigation control. Let me fix up my notes. Cool. So we have a map here. We can move it around. We can zoom. Let's add a couple markers to the page, right? Let's put some places here so we can see a marker. So let's just add one marker to the page. In order to do that, we're going to import a graphic for a pin. So let's import a graphic for a pin. Do we have any images in here? No. So let's add some images, and then nope, I don't want to add a file called images. I want to add an image file. Images, and then let's add an image file. Let's go search for one. Map pin. Let's go find an example. That's way too big. That's like 1,000 pixels. That's a little still too big. That's too big. This was a good one. So let's go find that image. Let's use the red one here. We gotta answer a lot of questions just to get a pin image. Okay, cool. So here's our pin image. Let's make sure it's really what we want it to be. Yep. Is it huge? Image.
PNG file ideal for React.
No, PNG is just a format of an image, like JPEG or GIF. It's just an image format.
So
Has nothing to do with it. No, I'm gonna use a PNG here because one of the nice things about PNG files is they can have a transparent background. So first I'm gonna shrink this down. Let's shrink this file. This image is pretty big. I'm gonna use my image tool here to shrink this down to like, let's make it much smaller. That's good. Now let's save it. I made this like 150 by 150. You can play around with different sizes. And then let's put it in my SDG Unit 3, Week 9, SDG, client, source, images, pin.jpg, pin.png, that's hard to say. And get out of here. Okay, cool. So we have a pin file. And now my app should be happy again. Oh, no, I gotta tell it where it is. So the pin is not here, it's up a directory in my images folder. Okay, so now we've imported the pin we want to use. Now let's put a marker on the page. So inside of the map, let's put a marker. So the marker takes a couple of things. It takes the longitude, the latitude, the offset top and the offset left of the pin, right? Because the point is going to be somewhere, but the point of your pin is not necessarily in like the upper left-hand corner. So sometimes you have to like move the pin around so it lines up on the dot where you want the thing to be. That's what that offset is for. So we may have to play around with these numbers based on the pin that we found. And you'll notice that inside of the marker, we put our image. So you can use anything as a marker. You can use an animated GIF, a video, you could use text. Probably an image of a pin makes the most sense, but you can really put anything you want in there. And let's see if we got a pin on the
I have a
page.
question about the pin.
Mm-hmm.
You said, are you importing the image source on the app itself?
In the component,
In
yes.
the component, okay, yeah, got it, I've seen it. If you, it would just be import whatever the file path is.
Mm-hmm. Just like importing an
Okay,
image anywhere else.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't remember that actual. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so we just import the image. We could call it anything, map pin, pins, right, fancy
Yeah.
pin. And then we just say, just like we normally do, an image whose source is pin.
Thank you.
You can do import too. You can just use like dots, image.
Not for React.
Yeah, it's like
It
you
will-
have to require.
Yes.
Yeah.
It will work, but then when you deploy it, it will fail. You should be importing your images. So let's see if we can find where that pin went. Whoa, there it is. Right? And it's still really huge. So, yeah. So we probably want to do something in here like width equals 64, height equals 64.
Don't you need art?
No, the pen is the image. Because you're putting on.
So on the art.
Right. And there's some tricks you can do to resize the pin as the app resizes. Let's come up with a better location for that pin. What was the location that we came up with for? Let's use this latitude. And let's use this longitude. That way it's kind of near where we are. And I'm going to copy this back to my notes. Right, so we're going to kind of hard code for the minute. Yeah, let's do like this. We're still going to hard code this marker for a moment so that it shows up. Oh, where'd my map go? Oh, I'm not running my server. That way we're not in like Siberia when we were guessing that latitude and longitude. So hopefully now if we zoom out just a little bit, is it still way up there in Siberia? Nope, now it's down there. Oh, you know what I probably did? I might have these backwards. Yeah, I had them backwards. Cool, so this one should be right over Casita Taqueria because that's where I said I lived. And if we zoom in, yeah, that's about where Casita Taqueria is. But it's really hard for you to see, like, there's like shapes of buildings. I don't know if you can see them, the screen's not that great.
Can you only see the dark?
Say it again?
Or can you make it like brighter?
You can change the map style. So if we change this map style, let's just comment the map style out, what do we get? like this.
Wow. That's a
Right.
lot.
Yeah, this is the default. This is the default map style. So that's a little bit easier to see. Yeah, you can see the buildings. Okay, so that's cool and all. I think I want to make this.
Are you going to try this image?
Yeah, This is gonna be in the. It'll be in the handbook.
Okay.
The samples. Okay, so now that's one location, right? That's one marker. But what if we want a whole bunch of markers? Well, fortunately, in our cohort details, don't we have this .state.cohort.students, right? So let's pass the students to the student map. Let's give the student map this .state.cohort.students. Here's a list of our students. What do each of our students have? Latitude and longitude, right? That's what we need to be able to make a pin. So in the student map, right here where the marker is, let's do this.props.students map student becomes a marker. So now we should have one marker for every student, but we don't want to use this hard-coded latitude. What do we want to use?
Oh, this dot.
Not this dot props. We're iterating over.
This student dot latitude.
Yeah, we want the student latitude. Instead of here, we want the student longitude. Right, so now rather than have one hard-coded marker, we should have many independent markers. So now if we created a new student, let's add a new student. CODIS, 1600 Pennsylvania, that's not right, right? Pennsylvania Ave. Washington, D.C. I think it's 22001. I think it's right. Acts like a 5-year-old.
Oh, that means president. It's like the big
President of the United States.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you meant Mr.
I
Lucas.
just realized that.
Yeah. So now we have 3 students. Let's see if we have those 2 there, and hopefully when we get up to Washington D.C., there's our next student, right? So as I add students, the map regenerates new stuff on the map, right? All I did to do that was on my parent, I passed down the list of things that I want to have mapped. And in my map, rather than have one marker, I loop over that set of students and I map, not like of the United States, but map, turn one array into another, turn my array of students into a whole bunch of markers where the marker's location is that student's latitude and longitude. Right?
Can you use spread operator for this?
Can you use what?
Can you use spread operator?
Spread operator? No. No, because the spread operator is only used to turn the attributes of something into attributes of the parent. Here I want to turn the array of students into one marker for every student. I have one student, I have one marker. I have one student, I have one marker. I have one student, I have one marker. So whatever my list of students is, what I really want is a list of markers. And map is what we use for that. Cool. So there's a list of students. I can move the map around, right? But what would be cool is, what if I could click on a pin and see details about that student, right? Nice. So we've got to do something else for that. Every time let me refresh this to go home, right? Every time we move the map, we're changing state. So if I want to know if a pin has been clicked and do something, we're going to track that in state as well, right? Everything we do in React is based on when I change something in the map or the page, you update state. So let's add something to our state up here called pop-up info. We're going to make it null. We're going to say there's no pop-up information here, right? The user has not popped anything up by clicking on something. In our render down here, we're going to add a call to a function that's going to render a pop-up. So down here, right before the markers, we're going to call this.renderPopup, which is a function we're going to write. So in addition to the markers, we also want there to be a pop-up.
What's the syntax for for state the pop-up info? Is that the snake case?
This here, yeah, this is it's the same JavaScript snake case. Sorry, camel case.
Yeah, because I was doing it states. I was doing it with underscores.
Yeah, you can. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just a little bit atypical style. So let's write that pop-up info function. The pop-up info function looks like this. So we're going to put this above the render. So the purpose of this function, change this, use my cool spread operator. So the first thing pop-up's going to do is get the pop-up info from the state. If we don't have any, return, and don't render anything, right? So this is the function that's going to either render a pop-up or render no pop-up. So if there's no pop-up info in the state, right, that state is still null, then there's nothing to do. But if you do have a state, let's return a pop-up, which is one of the map library's components. The size is going to be a 5, so you can change the size of that pop-up. The anchor for the pop-up is at the top. The latitude and longitude is the latitude and longitude of the pop-up info. Do we want to close this pop-up when the user clicks it? Maybe yes, maybe no. When we close the pop-up, what do we want to do? We'll put the state for pop-up info back to null, because the pop-up info is either going to have in it nothing or the student we clicked on. Right? So pop-up info is null if there's no pop-up to show, or it's going to be the student object that we clicked on. Right? Inside of the pop-up, we can put our own markup. So this can be any markup we want. It could be images, it could be a video, it could be a div with the text of the address inside of it. Let's add the pop-up info dot, what else do we have on a student? Their name, their age, and their email. Let's put their name. So inside of here, anything that we recorded in the pop-up info, which for us is going to be a student object, we can display that. Right? So we added a state for pop-up info. It's null if we don't want to show any pop-ups. The render pop-up function says get that state. If it's missing, just get out, don't show anything. If it's there, put a pop-up on the page at the location, the longitude, and the latitude of the thing that we clicked on. When it's closed, put the state back to null, and the pop-up will go away. Inside of the pop-up, let's put the name and the address of the person. This means there's got to be some way of us to record that pop-up. Now on the image, we need a little bit something more. We want the image here now to have an on-click. So in addition to the width, height, and the source, we're going to say when that image is clicked, set the state to the current student. So when someone clicks on the pin, if you set the state of the pop-up info to the student, now it re-renders, and this .render pop-up will generate a pop-up. So now what should happen is Jason Perry. If I click on this one, Gavin Stark. If I click on this close, it goes away. Click, click, click. All that's happening here is if we bring up React, let's bring up the React tool so we can see what's going on with that.
So it's essentially from what we've seen so far, I can create a map, and then as long as I have like data, we can technically already have like
Yes.
my app.
A lot of the guts of that rendering is there. So look at the pop-up info on the viewport. So as I move this around, see what's happening to a viewport? It's changing. Watch what happens when I click on this image. Did you see pop-up info filled in? Let me click on this. Come on. Right? Look what pop-up info is. It's all the details about that student. When I click on this one, right, all I'm doing is changing the state of pop-up info. When I click close, what does that do? It makes pop-up info null, and it goes away, right? This is the idea that if we keep modifying state, we just have to have the things render that state says they need to do. Right? So there's some more cool things we can do with the map. We can have the map automatically center on where the user is. We could add another marker here to show where the user is. Right? So maybe what you want in an app like yours is for there to be a different style pin, a different marker with a different image for where the user is. Right? And I can show you that offline as to how to get the user's location and draw a pin. Will's also done it, so you want to get with him and see how he did it. He did something very similar. I helped him with some bugs on that. But that would be a cool thing, rather than just see all of the various students, see where the student is. Right? The last thing that we haven't talked about is things like this. Back in the Rails side, we can say, show me all of the whatevers, students, jobs, restaurants, venues, that are near an address. Right? So in our database, if we're looking to have a search, let's find all the students that are near St. Petersburg, Florida, within 100 miles. Right? That found Gavin and Jason, and Bob Smith, but it did not find POTUS, right? So, but if we put in find all the students near Washington, D.C., that finds POTUS. So in your app, if you have a search, right, just like we did the animal search and whatnot, if you say all my jobs are the jobs that are near that search term within some number of miles, you'll get back just the jobs that match that search. Those are the things you want to put on the map. So this searching ability is really cool. Look at the complex, look at that query that it made, right? There's all kinds of like geometry math in there. Because what it does is it looks up the locations of Washington, D.C., right? Which is like probably this and this. And it does like a surface of the earth curve search, right? Because the earth is curved, right? We're not flat earthers. Right, so we've got to do spherical math. And I don't know about you, I'd rather write this than I would rather write this, right? It figured out how to do all that math, right? And we're just saying, please take Washington, D.C. and look it up. You can also just give it an array of a latitude and a longitude, right? Right? There are no students near wherever that is. I noticed that was much faster because it didn't have to do the lookup part. Right? If we do Washington, D.C., you'll note that it takes a half a second and then, because it's looking up Washington, D.C. every time. Right? So if you were doing something like, hey, show me all the students that live near this student, right? I would probably do this method. Right? If all of us were in the database, I would say, show me all the students that are near where Gavin lives. So you would take my latitude and longitude, and then it would return any students that are within 100 miles or 100 kilometers.
That's 100 miles?
100 miles, yeah. Or if you say units kilometers, then it's 100 kilometers. Right? So all these things together get pretty powerful. Right? We're using the geocoder gem to take our addresses and look up latitudes and longitudes. And then we're using that really cool map component to render out our maps. Now, there are some fancier things you can do with the maps, but I think once you get the basic map implementation in, then you'll get a sense for other things you want to do with it, right? We could certainly style it better, put it in a better place on the page. We can maybe put the list of students over on the right-hand side, right? Maybe what we want is something where, and this is a neat thing, maybe when we click on this student, maybe they should be highlighted down here. Right, so maybe you have a list of jobs on the right-hand side and the pins, and maybe when you click on here, it highlights the pin in the map, or when you click on the job in the map, it highlights the list. I'm not going to show that here in lecture, but we can work on those kinds of things together. And it just requires a little bit of like state management to be able to do those sort of things. We could certainly format this better, right? You can do any kind of styling you want inside of here, because that box is just a pop-up, right? It's just this div right here. So if we did div class name equals map pop-up, then in our CSS we can say dot map pop-up color purple. Oh, I'm not running the server again. Right? So you can style that pop-up however you want as well. I think the only thing about it is that it ends up being rectangular.
Oh, you can change that.
Yeah, that I'm not sure about changing the style of this rectangle box, but I think anything inside of that you can style however you want.
What if I want it to be like you move maps when you click on something, it like shows it either on the left side or right side?
Yeah, so that I think you can control with this anchor. I think if we do this, yeah. And then you just have to style it to offset it some. So all of that's going to be in the documentation for the library. So here's the pop-up, right? And it says the pop-up has a latitude and longitude. We can set the offset. So maybe what we want is anchor right and offset left equals, I don't know, let's try 100. What does that do? All right, so some of it's going to require checking the documentation a little bit. Okay, that's too far, right? And
Yeah.
play with the documentation a little bit.
It's like more like.
Oh, over there? Yeah, that you have to code.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing I was saying, where like if the students were over here, or you wanted a pop-up details, I will show you how to do that
Okay.
as a separate thing, because it's a little bit more complicated, and I don't think for like a general map discussion we need it. But yeah, definitely that's a thing we can do. Get the basic map functioning work, do this first, and then we can extend that to be a sideways thing, because that would look really cool if you had like a details box over here, and as you clicked on things, it happened. I think we could also even do it with like a hover. You could probably have that work as well if you didn't want to have it on click. Those are some things we could mess around with. Yeah, but that's about it for maps. They seem like they would be really, really, really hard. But fortunately, geocoder makes the Rails side really easy.
Yeah.
And this awesome map library from Uber makes the map stuff really, really pretty easy. Yeah, now there's a whole, like there's depth you can go into as you read through the documentation, right? We've just kind of scratched the surface. There's all kinds of other things you can do with it. Right? But I think for not a whole lot of effort, we get something that's pretty good and gives a nice interface for what we're going to do. You're going to add things all around it, right? That's where you're adding on value. But I think for just getting something up and going, not bad. Questions? Okay, I'll post the guide so you can go back and have that and the video notes
Cool. Perfect.
to go through them. And then I'm gonna push this code to GitHub so you'll see what we.
It's good. Yeah,
when
it's
we
been
code
really
it.
helpful at this assignment, especially to break down the routes and all the back end.
Mhm.
I spent Monday night doing that with Universal Explorer.
Mhm.
And I felt it definitely was
Yeah, I like the bigger projects that we build up over time. I think that helps see progression.
Yeah, that's really important, especially when learning and stuff.
Yeah.
It's so important.
So otherwise, it kind of seems like I did this thing on this project, and I did this thing on this project, and you don't kind of see sometimes how they all fit together.
Yeah.
So I think this one has been good for us to kind of see from the very beginning. We've kind of flowed through everything, including authorization and maps. And tomorrow we'll do image uploads because it would be neat to have a picture of the student. And when you click to have Gavin's picture here, and click here and have Jason's picture here. So we'll add picture uploading tomorrow. We're just kind of adding everything we need into the app. Oh, I wonder if I delete Jason.
So for backend,
Oh,
we
look at
did
that. That's nice.
we did like a patch, with by
Mhm.
and for now I kind of confused to put them together. So
What do you mean, sort of we did things?
like for example, like we one day we just make a table and then we create a product and then
Mhm.
bit by bit and then I need to do as a whole process. But
Mhm.
I know only one process like that, but I don't
Right.
know how it goes.
But you should do that for each thing. So you should be doing that for your images. Then you do that whole process for videos. Then you can do that whole process for the next thing. Kind of like Garrett's about to do his scaffolds, but then he's going to start with implementing his yoga classes. Once he gets yoga classes done, then he's going to do yoga poses. Once he gets yoga poses done, he's going to do yoga steps. Right?
For backend.
On the back end and the front end. He's going to do the front end of the back. So he's going to create all of his scaffolds, make sure his API works. Then he's going to go through his yoga classes and be able to create, read, update, and delete classes. Then likely he's going to go on to yoga poses that are related to classes, create, read, update, and delete. Then steps, and then create, read, update, and delete. Right? He could do all creates, all reads, then all deletes, and then all updates, or creates and then updates. So you're either trying to do all reads, all deletes, all creates, all updates across horizontally. So Garrett could say, I'm going to be able to read yoga classes, yoga poses, yoga steps, then delete yoga classes, yoga poses, yoga steps, then create yoga classes, yoga poses, yoga steps, then edit yoga classes, yoga poses, yoga steps. Or let me read classes, delete classes, create classes, update classes. Then go create poses, read poses, delete poses, create poses, update poses. It's the difference between working horizontally or vertically. It really doesn't matter which approach you do. Right? In this one, we sort of did mostly everything was cohorts first, right? We were able to read cohorts, delete cohorts, create cohorts, update cohorts. Once all that was done, then we went to students. We could see the students in the class, delete students from the class, create students and update students. Either approach is fine. It's up to you which style you like to do. So either do read everything, be able to delete everything, be able to create everything, be able to update everything, or start with one thing and be able to read them, delete them, create them, update them. It's up to you. For something like Garrett's app and something like Juan's app where there's a nesting, right? His app has yoga classes that have many yoga poses, that have many yoga steps. He should start with classes. Whatever he starts with, he should start with classes. It's the very top of the pyramid. Your app is not nested. You just have videos, images, links. Nothing is inside of another thing, right? Links don't belong to videos. Videos don't belong to images. So you don't have nesting. So you could start with whichever one you want. He should start with yoga classes, but either he has to do all of yoga classes or do read and delete and then do poses, read and delete, and then do steps, read and delete, across or down.
So So if I have a searching function,
That's a read.
that's read.
Mm-hmm.
I do need mapping.
You need what?
I need mapping for that, right?
Mapping?
Depends
This?
Not map, like
Right.
You get a list of the stuff you want to do.
That's going to be like in the Animal Safari one when we did search.
Mhm.
It's going to be like that. Not map, we're going to use active record to do that search. That's going to be like the search we did there. And didn't we do a search here? Did we do a search here? I don't think we did it. Yeah, we did a search here, right? Like this, right? You want to search for videos, right?
Search for like with keyword.
Right, like this. Search for Google. I search for Yahoo, I get nothing. Right, search is going to be like this.
The searching is not necessary, right? Not mandatory.
Nothing is mandatory. The only thing that's mandatory from your cohort is I want to see you able to create, read, update, and delete. That's it. As long as you can demonstrate you can build a Rails application that can create, read, update, and delete data, and you have a React app that accesses it, you are good. Had students who made very small apps, as long as they can create, read, update, and delete a thing, we're good. Speaking of maps, Kenny in the last class, his let him create, read, update, and delete bars in town. That was it. Here's a list of bars. I can create, read them, update, and delete them. That's all. That's the only requirement for a final project. A React app, a Rails app, create, read, update, and delete something. How many you want to do, it's up to you. That's why I said focus on links, videos, and images, because that's enough. All the other things you want to add, that's bonus for you. Right? He's got 2 or 3 tables. He's going to be able to have companies, jobs, and locations. He can create, read, update, and delete them and put them on the map. He has yoga classes, poses, and steps. He can create, read, update, and delete them. Right? Anastasia has troops and cookie selling events. She's been able to create, read, update, and delete them. Tatiana has sewing patterns, I guess is what we call them, right? And she can create, read, update, and delete them. Cool. You have links, images, and videos. You can create, read, update, and delete them. If you want to add search, cool. You want to be able to tweet out things, cool. All the extra stuff is just extra for you to demonstrate your skills and the things you find interesting. But as a minimum, from like SDG signing off on your project that you completed, that is a Rails application that's tied to a React application that can create, read, update, and delete something. And you've done some amount of styling of the application, so it's not plain. That's it.
And then we're done with it. Like, we get the project done.
Mhm.
What I want to know is like, how do it like this gradual process of actually like creating it.
Oh, so when someone comes out and asks us like, so tell me, how did you do this?
Yeah.
That's why we want you to code freeze on Tuesday, because you should be spending time on like Tuesday night, Wednesday, Thursday, practicing that pitch, right? Of like, here's a list of the components that I used. I used React Maps GL, which comes from Uber, and it's a React library that puts things on maps, and I used a geocoder gem to geocode my addresses into locations. What you're going to find is some people are going to come up to you and they're going to want to know, like, they want to see the code because they're another developer. But a lot of people are like, just tell me, how'd the project go? What did you start with?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the very first thing I did is I made my HTML. I would show them that Google Doc that you made. Like, I've planned my project this way. Here's the Trello board that I used. The very first thing I did was my HTML, my CSS, and then I turned that into React components. Then I made some JSON examples. I built a backend using Rails. I connected that, and that made an API. That's a JSON API. I connected it together. We'll help you go through that pitch. Also, asking alumni kind of what they felt worked for them is good too. What you're going to find is if you can wrap that in like 30 seconds. Hey, it's a React application connected to a Rails API that uses React Map GL and geocoder to do this. And if you start to see people be like, their eyes are glazing over, like, what? Then you can just like stop. But if they're like, really used blah, 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 oh, okay, like, you've identified they're a developer or they're a JavaScript person, then you can go into more detail and say, this is how I did it. I use state to track this and blah, 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 blah. And then you might want to have your project loaded in VS Code behind. So if someone says, can you show me? Then you can like alt tab over to VS Code and say, yeah, the code is here. But you don't have to, right? It's not like a job interview where like you have to like walk someone through the code and explain how it works. You probably don't want to be doing that too much.
Right.
So you're going to float somewhere between it's a React app and a Rails app, and here's look at the code. And you'll know based on how the person is reacting to you, which level of detail you need to go. But also remember, like sometimes there's like a stack of people, so you don't want to go into too long of a description. Yeah, and alumni will give you some good, like when there are alumni hanging out, like ask them like, how did you do that? What felt good to you? And you'll get a sense for how that went. And then we're going to talk about it some more too. But you know, just like you have like a little pitch together to explain your app, have the same length pitch on the technology side. Use some of the tips that I guess you all had a pitch. A guy came in and talked to you about pitching.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that sounded like that was more like how to sell your project, right? But use those same techniques because you're kind of selling your abilities, right? This is kind of showcasing your abilities and the things that you've learned. Apply that same mentality. Cool.
I studied actually HTML and CSS in React file. Is that
Mhm.
okay?
Yeah.
to say?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Cool. All right. I will